Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for attending this session of our Spring Online School. My name is Jessica and I am a project officer at the CPD unit at Cardiff University. Just a few housekeeping bits from me. We're all still working from home, so if there are any interruptions from pets, children, or poor Wi-Fi connections, then please bear with us. We would encourage you to pop your questions in the Q&A box throughout the session, and I will pose them to Richard at the end. We are recording this session and it will be available on our YouTube channel. This session is designed to be a taster session for an online project management course that Richard Rose will be running at the end of June at Cardiff University. It's a 3-day course and we're really pleased to be able to offer a discounted rate for those of you who are attending today. So we'll be sending you some further information about that in a follow-up email. So it's just left for me now to hand over to our fantastic presenter for today, Richard Rose. Just to say, Richard unfortunately is experiencing a few camera issues this morning, but you will still be able to hear him clearly. Thanks so much, Richard.
Thanks, Jess. Good morning, everybody. And let me just share my screen. Yeah, delivering change through projects, as Jess announced. During this session, what I'll try and get across is a little bit of an idea as to how project management gets used to create transformational change in organizations, and how it differs from what change management is. Because project management is one thing, change management is something else, as we will unfold, or as will unfold throughout the rest of this session. During our last 12 months, I think we've all seen that there has been a huge amount of change. Some of it has had to be incredibly rapid, and it's given rise, if you like, to the agile project management approaches that are out there amongst us, coming to the fore and almost displacing our traditional methods to a degree. At the end of the session, as Jess suggested, there is a little bit of information about whether you wish to pick up on a project management qualification or a professional course, or even attend the practical project management course that is towards the end of June. So there'll be a little bit of information for you at the end of this session. So what is it that causes us to have to change our organization? And what you can see here, this diagram offers a range of typical examples of strategic drivers for change that many organizations may well recognize. And these drivers will have implications for the capabilities that an organization will need to have in place in order to respond adequately to the strategic drivers that are now pushing them along. Achieving these changes often requires a transformation that runs across many areas of the business and the organization. And one area, if you look around the clock of this diagram, one area that stands out over, as I say, the last 12 months is that one there, the random events bit. Flood, disease and terrorism, and haven't we seen enough of that disease? So how do we actually bring about the transformational change and the organizational change that we're trying to get through by using projects? We tend to run a business on a sort of business as usual basis. It's about turning the handle, keeping an operational process or procedure working, and delivering on specific key performance indicators such as throughput, achieving particular timescales, having an opening and closing time for a business, customer or maybe employee satisfaction ratings, and all of those sorts of things. So if we want to change business as usual, then we deliver it through projects, and they alter the ways that we turn that handle. So we may want to move, as we have seen quite a lot in the last 12 months or more, from moving from a shop-based retail operation to an online presence. And if you stop and consider the differences in how those two operations work and how much change is needed to be applied to make that shift in working practices, then you need some logical approach in order to affect that change. But first of all, let's just be clear that projects are the means by which we introduce our change. They are not the change themselves. Projects under project management end up delivering stuff, whatever stuff might be. Change management is much more about helping people cope with all the anxieties and all the problems that come with having to adopt a new way of working. So if you look at the image on the left, that depicts the end of a project, delivering its outputs, if you will. And that's all covered by project management. The central image is about when you've delivered your project, how those people who are affected by the change unpack those deliverables. And in the case of moving house, they'll find things that are broken or missing, or they've got to find new places to put their valuables. And there's a lot of confusion. There's also a sense of loss. You've left where you have been, and you may have grown up there, or you may have started your family there and you're now moving into a larger place. So there is a bit of a sense of a loss, even though you're looking to a better future. There's a bit of trepidation. And that goes with any transitioning to a new way of living. And that third image is where we have come to terms with all of that. We've come to terms with our new environment, and we are now comfortably, if you like, at home in our new surroundings. And those second and third images are what change management is about. So first, let's find out what is a project. Well, if we take two traditional methods, Prince2, which is a UK best management practice, and APM's version of a traditional method. Prince2 says a project is a temporary organization that is created for the purpose of delivering one or more business products according to an agreed business case. A temporary organization? Absolutely. projects have a start and a finish, and they have an organization which is focused on helping direct and manage and deliver that project. It's created for the purpose of delivering one or more business products. And I quite like the emphasis in Prince 2 on the word business, because products could be anything and they could come from anywhere. But business products are all about the business paying for this project to be run and producing its products or outputs or deliverables for its own use. Therefore, they are business products and the business owns them. And then they talk about that business case, an agreed business case. A business case is the reason or justification for doing the project in the first place. It balances the positives against the negatives, the benefits or value that you get out of the project against the risks and the costs and any negative effects that you may cause because your project is running. Look at APM's description out of their APM body of knowledge guide. They call it a unique transient endeavour undertaken to achieve planned objectives. It's a similar story. They are now suggesting every project is unique, which is absolutely true. They are transient endeavours. They have a start and a finish. And their planned objectives, again, are bound up inside a business case, but they don't mention the business case. They are just planned objectives. However, by mentioning the words objective, or the word objectives, I should say, they are suggesting that you should be linking with the strategic objectives of the organization. And therefore, if this project is running, it is running because the organization wants it to run in order to satisfy a strategic objective. So they're very similar descriptions. So that's what a project is. Now, I've mentioned the fact that there are traditional projects and there are these things called agile projects. Traditional projects, Prince 2 and APM, the APM PQ qualification. Agile project, there are examples such as Agile PM, which is the Agile Business Consortium's DSDM framework, and Scrum, which is probably one that more people have heard about. What I need to sort of try and stress here is that these two styles of project management are not mutually exclusive. You can run parts of a traditional project under an agile approach. For example, if you have a building construction project, it's more aligned with a traditional approach, needing a sequence to get it started. You'll need some form of architectural design, planning permissions, site clearance, the introduction of the various utilities, the foundations, and then the walls and the floors and the roof and the internal dividing walls. And if you stop and think about it, you can't do some of those things before other things have been completed. So there is a logical sequence to that. And traditional civil engineering and construction projects work in that way. However, do we really need to specify the colour of those internal walls, or the colour of the carpets or the curtains right at the start of the project? No, absolutely we don't. We can wait until later in the build to make those decisions. We may change our minds due to fashion, vogue. So the main difference between traditional projects and agile projects is the requirements that we gather right at the outset. In traditional projects, we have to come up with everything that we want in detail so that we can plan it out over time. And this we call BDUF, Big Design Upfront. In agile projects, we provide a high-level specification of the major things that we want, and then we leave it until later to provide the detail. And this we call EDUF, Enough Design Upfront. I'll cover this a little bit more and later and explain how that works. There's a third aspect to these projects, and that is it doesn't matter whether you're running a traditional or an agile approach. All projects have a similar set of attributes. They will have a start and a finish, a finite and defined lifespan. There will be a set of requirements, features, outputs, or business products, as Prince 2 likes to mention. And if we are going to produce a set of these business products, then we will need a number of activities to achieve those outputs. In order for those activities to be successful, we'll need to define an amount of resource. Now, resources in projects are anything from human resource to the use of plant and machinery to finance and budgets. And so we're going to have to define how much of all of those things we want in order for us to then to be able to control against those numbers to see if we're on target. And finally, we need that organization structure in place. We need the hierarchy of decisions. Who is going to make serious decisions about this project and its progress? Who is going to run the whole thing on a day-to-day basis? And who's going to provide the skill and expertise to build the products and the services that we're after? So, how do these two styles actually work? And what is the difference? Well, let's break Prince 2 down into its sort of component parts. And if we take this, what we have is we have a set of 7 principles to abide by in order for the project to operate in a controlled manner. Starting at the top, we have defined roles and responsibilities. We need to make sure that the right people are in the organization structure to help us direct the project. So this will be our project sponsor or executive, plus anybody who is helping them and assisting them on a project board if it is a very large project. And then we have manage by stages. Manage by stages is about breaking your big project up into manageable chunks and then managing each stage almost as a separate little sub-project of the main project so that we can keep on top of what we are trying to achieve. Managing by exception is where we delegate work to various other people, and we set some boundaries around that work, which means that if they stay within the boundaries, everything is going fine. If they break those boundaries or forecast to break those boundaries, then we are in what we call an exception, and that has to be escalated to the next level of management. So our team or work package managers are allowed to get on with their work, but if they look like breaking those boundaries, that causes an issue which goes to the project manager. The project manager will do the same sort of thing, but at a higher level across all their work packages. And if they get into an exception, they have to then elevate that and take it to the project board. So we manage by exception. If it's not in an exception, it's clean and green and we keep rolling. Learn from experience. That's something that we should all be doing anyway. But in project management terms, it's about understanding what has happened over the past stage or stages of the project and applying that learning to what we're going to do to plan the next few stages of the project. So we learn from our experience and we apply it on into the future. And thereby we get better at what we do. Tailoring. You can't just take a mammoth method and apply that method to every single project. You have to tailor the method to the risk, complexity, priority, and breadth of the projects. So if you took the whole of Prince2 and tried to apply all its excellent features to a 2-week piece of work, you would smother that piece of work. And hence Prince2 occasionally gets called bureaucratic because it appears to be that you're managing the method rather than managing the project. I might take issue with that because it tends to suggest that the organization hasn't tailored the method to that particular project. And think of it this way, Prince2 is always a set width. It is the depth that varies. Big, complex projects want a lot more depth out of the method. Little, tiny, lighter projects need a thinner depth out of the method. So tailoring is all important with any big traditional method. Continued business justification suggests that we have a business justification in the first place. And that means we've got a valid and worthwhile business case. Continued business justification makes sure that as we roll through time, we check that that business case is still valid and is worthwhile. And where we find that it isn't, we should be questioning whether we should be prematurely closing the project or changing its direction. Where it is found to be worthwhile, then that gives us the go-ahead to go on with the project into the next stage and beyond. And finally, focus on products. We're coming back to that word product because everything we do should lead to the deliverable at the end of the project. We may deliver products throughout the project. And what we do with products is we make sure that we put the right level of quality into these products so that at the end of the project, we get the right level of quality and an acceptable product at the end, which is designed to drive out the benefits and value for the organization. So those are our principles. They're our guiding light, if you like. And those we abide by throughout the whole length of our project. Alongside them, we have a set of 7 themes. And these themes govern how we do things throughout the project. So we abide by our principles and we use our themes to help us throughout the project. Our themes are the business case, which I have mentioned already. It's the mainstay of why we are doing the project and whether we should continue. The organization, and that particular component describes the roles and responsibilities of the project executive or sponsor, the board members, the project manager, team managers, and how any other ancillary organizational components work. Quality. What the quality theme is all about is ensuring that whatever we build, we apply a set of quality criteria and maybe a degree of tolerance around those criteria to our products so that we build product that is fit for purpose. Risk theme is all about risk management. Projects are all about risk and they're all about people. But we're doing something that is not business as usual. It is not commonplace. It is going to introduce change. And because of all of that, there's a degree of uncertainty about a project. And therefore, there's a degree of risk, whether it be a positive risk or a negative risk. So risk theme is all about how we do risk management throughout the project. Planning. Projects need plans. And contrary to common urban myth, even our agile projects need plans. So don't ever be fooled into thinking you can do projects without doing any planning. And we need plans at a project level, at a top level, so we can see where we are at any particular point. We need a plan at a much more detailed level so that we can see where we are with the delivery of our individual products and the activities that surround those. If you like, a desktop working plan that the project manager and the team managers or work package managers can then readily access and understand. Change. This is all about how we control requests for change to the scope of our project. Lack of change control is still one of the greatest reasons for projects, traditional projects, running late and running over budget and not delivering exactly what the customer wants. So we have to introduce change control. And that's, excuse me, and that is what the change theme is all about. How do we make sure that the integrity of the scope of the project isn't compromised by a lack of change control? And then progress. You can't measure progress unless you've got a plan. So the two things are equally linked. Progress reporting. Where are we at any particular point? What reports are required by each level of the organization? And how do we cascade information through the team and out to the wider stakeholder population? So we've got some principles and we've got some themes. We now just need to know how we're going to run all of that. And therefore we need some sensible process. And this is a set of 7 processes. So if we look at them, how this works is that we start with a thing called starting up a project. And starting up a project is a brief view of what we think we have to do, how long we think it might take, and whether we've got a bit of a justification for it in the first place, whether it's strategically aligned. So we're going to answer some big high-level questions here. We're going to put them together in some information and pass that to the directing level of the project. This is the project executive or project board. They will look at that information and they'll say, yep, that looks like we've got a project, but we haven't got all the information we need. So project manager, would you please go away and do some deeper digging for us? And therefore I will then get into the initiating a project phase or stage. During that, I will work out how we're going to do change control, how we're going to do communication management, how we're going to do risk management, and how we're going to do quality management. I'll produce a project level plan. I will make sure that the organization structure is appropriate for the project by talking with the board members. And I will make sure that we finalize a solid business case. And all of that comes together and we complement it at the end of the stage by going through that little thing called managing a stage boundary, where we pull all our stage information together and we add one more thing, one more component to the information. We add what is going to happen in the very next stage. So we add all that information together with a next stage detailed plan, and it goes to the board. And the board says, yes, we like this. This is good stuff. Or maybe they say, no, it looks like this is too risky. The business case isn't great. You know, it's just showing a little bit more value than negative. So I'm a little bit worried by this. So let's not pursue this project right now. So initiating a project doesn't always mean the project will actually run. What it does is it provides the business with enough information to make the decision as to whether the project is worth running or not. And if they say, yes, we like it, then what the project manager does is they get into their first stage of their project and we focus on the products. There's a principle for us. We make sure during our controlling of the stage that our work packages are passed out to our work package or team managers. And that's the purple stuff at the bottom there. Managing product delivery is left in their hands. And I don't want to micromanage them. So I give them the information that they need to run their project. And they run their various work packages through the project until we get to the end of that stage, at which point we gather all our information together again, we produce a detailed plan for the next stage, and we pass it up to the board to say, do you like it? If so, do you want to continue? And they will review the information and make a decision. Hopefully, because it's been running well and it's still a viable and worthwhile project, they pass you off into the next stage. And that will continue for as many stages as you have. And this project shows 4 stages: initiating a project and 3 others following it. The only difference is when you come to the last stage, you end up with closing a project as a process rather than managing a stage boundary. And in closing a project, you gather up all the information for the whole of the project and you evaluate it in an end project report plus some other information, and you can recommend project closure. Pass all that information to the board, they check it through, make sure you've got acceptance of all your products and that everything is complete as expected, and then they close the project off. So it's a simple, logical way of working. And if we stick to it and work through it and use all the controls that are in there, having tailored it for the project in the first place, then Prince2, as an example of a traditional method, works extremely well. Okay, tradition out of the way. What about Agile? Well, let's take Agile Project Management or Agile PM as an example of an Agile approach. What we have with this is we have a philosophy, which is, if you like, another word for an approach, as far as we're concerned. And the Agile philosophy is based on what we in the trade call the little Greek temple. It has a set of principles, which I'll go through in a moment. And those principles are supported by us using certain processes, having people doing things in our project, producing products, and adopting certain practices or techniques during our project to make it work. But the one thing that is always an impressive thing for me is the fact that although we're running a project which is all planned, we base everything we do on a bit of common sense and a bit of pragmatism. We know things aren't going to go well. Therefore, we are preparing ourselves for things not to go well. And therefore, we work out how we're going to make the adjustments based on a bit of common sense and a bit of pragmatism. So, the principles. There they are. And focus on the business need. And I think that that's an important, there's an important word in there, and that is the word need, as opposed to focus on what the business wants. Want and need are two different things. They might want all sorts of things, but what they need in order to affect the change might be something slightly different. So let's focus on what the business actually needs. Let's make sure we always deliver on time. We never slip our dates, either for a time box or an increment or the project itself. Now that sounds like it's a bit of an impossible task, but there are ways of doing this, and I will come to those in a moment. In order for us to deliver what the business actually needs, we need for the business to collaborate and for our technicians to collaborate with the business and amongst themselves. Sounds like that's what ought to happen in traditional projects as well, but somehow it doesn't. With traditional projects, quite often the project is discussed at the beginning. We have a kick-off meeting, everybody agrees things, and then they go back to business as usual. The users disappear and they leave it to the project to try and muddle through and deliver what they think the business wants. Whereas in Agile, they go, no, 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 no. This is your project. You are part of this project. You need to keep in touch with us right the way through and collaborate with the solution deliverers in order for you to achieve what you need. And they make a big thing of it, quite rightly so. Never compromise quality. That's all about us always building stuff to the right level of quality for the sole reason that if you deliver quality to a lesser degree, then you cannot possibly achieve the level of benefit that you've stated in your business case, because you have degraded product, which gives you degraded benefits. So never compromise on your quality. Build incrementally from firm foundations. So start the thing off by building something that is good and solid, from which you can then build the next increment and the next increment after that. Develop iteratively. This is where you may well sit alongside a user or a customer, and as you develop something as a little prototype, you say, is that what you want? And they go, yes, but could we get it to do this? Yeah, we can. So I'll develop again, test it and present it, and again and again. So we develop the thing iteratively in a way that the customer is or users are expecting and wanting. Communicate continuously and clearly, please. This is all important with any project, but even more so with Agile, because Agile is a flexible, fast-moving way of working. So if we stop communicating, things will go wrong, and they'll go wrong quite rapidly. So we need to communicate amongst our team and amongst our stakeholders, and particularly with the ambassador from the business area that is part of our team. And demonstrate control. And believe it or not, demonstrate control is a bit like the Prince2 theme, progress. So how do you know where you are? And demonstrating control in an Agile project is much, much easier than it is in a traditional project, because we know we're not going to slip our time. We know we're not going to slip our budgets. We know we're going to deliver quality stuff. And therefore, demonstrating control isn't about talking about those things, which it is with traditional projects. It's much more about talking about what we are delivering than the amount of product that we're delivering, the risks and issues that we're facing. So it is a lot easier to demonstrate control in an Agile project than it is in a traditional project. So we've got this approach, this philosophy, we've got these principles. we probably ought to have some form of process. And the Agile PM process starts with a bit of pre-project. And this is done at a higher level than our project team. This is done by a portfolio level or a corporate level, where they've decided these are the projects that we need running. And then we will be passed that information through the pre-project phase of the process. We will then, if you look at the sort of slice of pizza that's sitting there, dividing it into two pieces, the first top piece is feasibility. This is where we take the information from pre-project and we work out, can this be done? Should it be done in an agile form? Is agile the right approach to running this project? And we get some other little bits of information together, an outline business case, an outline way of running this project, and an outline way of managing how we might run the project. And again, we will look for a decision from basically the business owner of the project. Once we got that, we're into foundations, deeper digging. Here we put together our delivery plan and maybe the first time boxes for the first increment. And we substantiate our business case and how technically we're going to run this project, how we are going to develop things, and how we're going to manage things. And then you'll notice there's this sort of blue arrow that goes off to the left into this big circular thing called evolutionary development. And that's a time box. So over a particular period of time, normally 2 to 4 weeks for time boxes, any longer than 4 weeks, and there's not so much feel of pressure to get things done, and so things can slide a little bit. If you keep it to a nice 2, 3 or 4 week period, then people feel compelled to get stuff done and keep the project rolling. So they do their evolutionary development, whatever that means, and whatever they're producing. And then there's a blue arrow that goes back across to that box, which is talking about deployment. And during deployment, what we do is we take the items out of our time box and we assemble them, putting them all together, doing some integrated testing, possibly some user acceptance testing, carry out a review and a retrospective, and then deploy into the business. And at the end of that, the post-project work is done by the business to check that they are getting the benefits that they suggested at the start of the project. Now, that looks very traditional to me, because we've done a little bit of work, then we've done a bit of deeper digging, then we've done some work in delivering this project, and then we're deploying it. But actually, there are a number of ways that you can configure this particular process. And you can adapt it and you can put variations in it. So there are sort of 3 big variations that you can look at. So the top one is we do a feasibility, we do a foundations, and then we do 3 time boxes and deploy. And that's a fairly simple thing. The second figure there is we do our feasibility, we do our foundations, we do 3 time boxes and we deploy something. We do 3 more time boxes and deploy something. We do 3 more time boxes and deploy something. And that's where Agile really has a benefit over traditional projects. Because what we try to do is build something which provides business value early. So you get a quick win. And by deploying it after 3 time boxes, you've got something of value that the business can use, and they'll use that while you're doing your next 3 time boxes and deploy something else. The other thing it gives is it gives a bit of a heartbeat to the deployment of things into the business. They're not being overloaded with change all at once. They're taking change in small chunks, which is much, much more easy to digest than having a big bang approach. The last little diagram, fairly obviously by now, you will have worked out, is after feasibility and foundations, you do a time box and deploy something, another time box and deploy something, and so on. So that's a rapid deployment where you know what you've got to deploy, you know that you've got a short time to do it, you do as much as you can in your time box and get it out there. A lot of that actually has happened over the last 12 months, as we will come to see. So those are the two ways that traditional and agile projects work. But the main differences in these styles are all about what becomes negotiable. And if we look at it, under traditional approaches, what tends to happen, and we're looking at features, quality, time, and cost. There are one or two other variables, but if we stick with those four, under traditional approaches, because we do a big design up front, we have this massive list of features or requirements, and they become fixed. And they are fixed to the point that we fixate on them. And if your project doesn't deliver every single one of those minute requirements, then you haven't finished your project, which sounds sensible, but is it? Because all of those requirements probably contain things that are cosmetic, bells, whistles that you're never going to use, but somebody thinks that it would be a good idea while the project's running, let's get it to do these things as well. So they pile in this massive list of features, including the kitchen sink. And as we get towards the end of our project, or from halfway through onwards, we start to recognize we might not get all this done within the time and cost. Where at the beginning of the project, time and cost were fixed, they're now going to start to become a little more variable. Well, we won't get all your features done by the end of November. I think we might have to take another couple of weeks. And because they want the features and they're fixated on the features, they shrug their shoulders, sigh, and say, oh, all right, then. Take another couple of weeks. At which point the board is now complicit in wrecking its own project. And because you've now said you need another couple of weeks, I might need a bit more money as well. So now the cost starts to go up. And they go, oh, all right, then you better have some more money. And you may go back again because things don't, projects don't run smoothly. And we all know that. And you go back a second time for a bit more time and a bit more money. And because you're nearing the end of the project and you've already spent £500,000 of the £600,000, the board are going, crikey, yes, you better spend it because, we can't waste, in inverted commas, the £500,000. So they allow another extension. And then you go back a third time, by which time they're a little peeved by your appearance. And now they're going to say, no, you have no more time. You have no more cost. Get it done, project manager. At which point I am now going to go back to the team and say, how do we get this finished within the time and cost? Because they're not allowing us any more. And that's why the quality ball at the back of this little diagram starts to become a little variable. It stops being fixed. And if we start to make quality slightly variable, then you also start to affect your benefits. So that's what tends to happen with traditional approaches. When you get to an agile approach, we flick the whole thing on its head. And the first thing we say with agile projects is, we do not move time, and we do not move cost, and we do not move on quality. So the only thing we can move on is that list of requirements or features. And therefore, if we've got these features or requirements, we have to have them prioritized in some sort of order so that we can get the really important stuff done. And maybe the slightly less important stuff can be jettisoned. And I can hear a whole load of people going, oh, you can't do that. If you live with the philosophy and you understand the practice of prioritization, and you agree this up front with your customer or your users, there won't be a shock. There was a useful quote from the customer of one of the very first DSDM projects that was run. And they said, we got less than we asked for, but more than we expected, because we got exactly what we wanted. And I think that speaks volumes. So they didn't mind that some of the lesser bells and whistles weren't provided, because they got the working solution they wanted for the budget and within the time that they asked for it. So, two big differences in the way that traditional and agile approaches work. The whole thing about never slipping time. The first thing we want to do is make sure that we use a time box. And a structured time box is one which breaks our time box up into sections. Every time box will have a kick-off meeting at the start and a closeout meeting at the end. The kick-off meeting is very simple. It's, what are we trying to achieve? What are the objectives of this time box over the next 4 weeks, let's say? And have we got a list of the requirements that you are going to build throughout those 4 weeks? And is that list prioritized? Do we all understand what we're going to do? Yes, let's get on with it then. And there might be a little bit of investigation at the start of the structured time box, where we're trying to assess some of the complexities, unravel some of those features, so that we can understand exactly what we need to build. Then the refinement piece, that's where we build. That's where we create our products. And then the consolidation is where you do your sort of testing and bringing stuff together so that it is a completed set of products or a product. And at the end of the time box, you do a closeout retrospective. And your retrospective looks back and says, okay, what went well? What didn't go quite so well? Have we actually had to jettison any of those low-level requirements? And if we have, what do you want to do with them, please, user or customer? Do you want them? In which case, we'll try and stitch them into another time box. Or are we past the point of caring now? In which case, we'll just put them back on the shelf and leave them alone. Now that's a structured time box where we might have to dismantle the set of features to understand what we've got to do. There's also a free format time box. Similar, we have a kickoff, we understand what we're doing, and we have a closeout to see what we've not completed and to gain acceptance of what we have completed. And in the middle, we just have a big chunk of iterative development. These free format time boxes tend to appear where we have already decided exactly what we need to do. And therefore, there is no investigation or consolidation. It's all going to happen inside that time box. So that's how we hold our times and hold our dates. But prioritizing the requirements is an absolute key feature, and we have to do this within an agile project. We should do it in a traditional project, but it seems to get lost somewhere and drifts away into the ether when we start talking about, can we prioritize this massive list of requirements? People sort of shudder and go, crikey, there's an awful lot of stuff there. No, just get on with it. And that's what happens. Whereas because we got a lesser number of requirements, because you do enough design up front, there's an easier list to prioritize. And therefore it gets done more frequently in Agile than in a traditional project. So prioritizing requirements is all about having a set of 4 priorities. The top one is we have the must-have requirements. We have the things that must be there in order for this project and its output to deliver its benefits. They have to be there to have a working solution. Then you have should-have requirements. Well, we really ought to be able to deliver those alongside the must-haves. If we planned it right and we've got the right amount of resource for this work, priorities 1 and 2 really ought to be delivered. Priority 3 is the wish list. This is where we have the could have requirements. If we've got enough time, having developed and delivered our musts and shoulds, we can spend some time on the coulds. And it's the one place where you can do most of your jettisoning of requirements. And then 4 is these requirements won't be delivered in this time frame. They might be delivered in another time frame, but not this one. So prioritization is key, because that means we can stay within our time box and we can use the amount of resource and cost to deliver the products that give you a working solution. Okay, enough about projects. Let's have a little look about the other end of life, when a project has delivered what it's supposed to deliver. Because projects, and it doesn't matter which type of project, they deliver the outputs and capabilities that affect change in an organization. And without a doubt, over the past, 25, 30 odd years, our project methods have become understood. They have brought a logical sequence to life, and they are being used far more effectively than they used to be. And because of that, project delivery has become more effective and more predictable, particularly in the agile space. But unfortunately, change still fails. And McKinsey and Co. Only back in 2017 came out with some statistics that show that change failure rates are still somewhere around between 70 and 80% when we try to affect change. That means most of our change is actually failing in some way, shape or form. And it's not down to the projects quite so much nowadays. It's down to the way that we introduce change into our organizations. And I think one of the better pictures, if you like, that is drawn is by a chap called William Bridges, where our project, and he talks about transition, managing this transition from old to new ways of working. And he talks about the project coming to an end and delivering its outputs. And at that point, people might experience certain emotions because now they know the changes upon them. And he calls that bit ending, losing, and letting go. You know what you have been doing is coming to an end. Some of it is going to feel a bit like a loss to you and to many others, and therefore you have to let go of what you used to do. And there's that list of bullets in there. I'm not going to go through those, but I think if we can all associate with some of that when we have had to leave a job we particularly liked, when we have moved house, or when one of our children goes off to university and leaves a hole in a bedroom upstairs, and you think, oh, yeah, they'll be coming back. Well, back in the day, they didn't. I think nowadays they probably do. But there is all of these sort of anxieties that you get about these sorts of changes and these transitions in your life. And what he says is that you get into a neutral zone. And in this neutral zone, people might start to feel a bit of resentment towards this change initiative. And because they are resenting what's going on, you know, you get the people saying, I don't understand why we had to change. It worked perfectly well, the old process. And you think, well, yeah, unfortunately, the world's changed. And the old process is not really working terribly well. It seemed to work well for you, but maybe it isn't. And because you are feeling that, you may get a bit of low morale, low productivity coming out of that. Maybe some anxiety about their security. What, you know, have I got a job at the end of this? What's my role going to be? And then there's that anxiety about, oh gosh, I've got to learn something new, and I'm not terribly good with learning stuff, particularly if it involves all this modern technology and things. So there are two anxieties now at play, and there's a learning anxiety and there's a survival anxiety. And you've got to deal with those sorts of things by giving people support and encouragement. So while you're trying to give them support and encouragement, while they're in this sort of neutral zone, this area of uncertainty, try to get them involved in what the future is going to look like. So get them to be creative, innovative, give them a sense of renewal is what William Bridges suggests. And it's a great time to get people involved in when the project is ending. Let's get them involved in the stuff we've got to do now to make business as usual come back to life. And hopefully they then arrive at what he calls the new beginnings. And the new beginnings, hopefully everybody is now feeling a slightly higher level of energy. They have now got over their fear of learning something new. You've given them the support. You've given them all the right encouragement. They're now operating in a way with a bit more renewed commitment, either to their own role, because they now understand it, or to their team, department, or group that they work within. And I quite like the way that William Bridges talks about managing transition, because we could have gone through Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's transition curve, but that sort of dwells on the neutral zone far too much, as opposed to understanding what you need to do to get to the new beginning with William Bridges. So this is how we need to manage some sort of transition between an old habit and a new habit, because that's really what transitioning and changing people's working practices is about. Humans are habitual animals. We can't help it, we are. And we form a habit around the way we work. Why? Because it's effective, it's efficient. I don't have to think about stuff. I know how to do it. And therefore I do it. And now you're asking me to break all of that habit, do something different. and then reconstitute a new habit. And that's exactly what's going on here with the ending, losing and letting go, breaking the habit, the neutral zone, learning something new, and the new beginnings of putting a new habit together. Okay, so what does the research say? I think there's a huge amount, and Hughes comes up with this, a huge amount of variable criteria. And because of all of that, it actually does make it quite difficult to draw any definitive conclusions about those failure rates. We can't specifically say it is because of one thing. It's a state of lots of things that will cause our failures. IBM, however, in their consulting arm, have worked with a large number of top performing organizations in their lives, which we know. And where they've worked with top performing organizations, they find that their success rates are in excess of 80%. Now, when we talk about a top performing organization, it means they've got their project management and method down. They've got a good governance structure in place for decision making. They've got a link between towards the back end of the project and the front end of the change. They've got change management personnel who are equipped with all the right tools and techniques to be able to deal with the people aspect of change. And after a while, when you've done that 2 or 3 times, the personnel out there who are the targets for change will start to understand what change is because they've been through it. And because of that, they get a much, much better success rate. But it costs time, money, and a lot of education to get to that point. Now, of course, you have to ask the question, is that investment actually worth it? And obviously those top performing organizations believe it is. So their return on their investments from the projects and therefore the change is greater than anticipated by other organizations. But if you look at the lesser performing organizations, there is this consistent accumulated evidence from the senior management, the project managers and the change managers out there that actually many change efforts do actually fail. They might not fail completely, but they fail in some aspect. So that's what the research says. So how do we try and get change to be successful then? In the face of all of this, which sounds a bit daunting and it's leaving us feeling quite miserable at this point, what do we actually try and do to make it more successful? Leclerc and Rao have come up with this really interesting statistic that suggests that at all 3 levels of senior, mid, and frontline management who were effective in their management techniques, they tended to get greater benefit and value out of their changes than those that weren't effective at those 3 levels. And it's very difficult to become effective at all 3 levels. Effective management also includes being effective leaders, because you can't just beat people with a stick to get stuff done. That doesn't work. That's not effective management. So you have to use leadership techniques as well as management techniques. And that means all 3 levels of your management team need to have all those attributes. And that is quite a tricky thing to get embedded in your organization. PricewaterhouseCoopers talks about that correlation between project performance, the maturity level of the organization, and change management. And if you have a mature organization which is pretty good at project management, pretty good at change management, what they tend to do is they link the two together. And they've recognized that change management has to dovetail into project management. Now, I would always err on the side of caution in asking a technical project manager to try and also manage the change to the business, because they are two very different things. Technical project management builds stuff, whereas change management deals with the people side. And they are very, very different things to manage. But they do need to dovetail together so they work hand in hand. And that's where the agile style of projects does tend to help, because you've got embedded in your solution development team, you have that ambassador, that representative of the business embedded in there, so they understand what is being built, why it's being built, how it's being built. And at the same time, they're acting as a voice from that technical team back into their business area. And they are constantly and continuously and clearly communicating, that's one of their principles, back into the business area. So they're being kept up to date all the time. So this dovetailing has already been introduced in Agile. So 4 key activities which make change effective. The first, you need to prepare and understand exactly what this change is, how complex it is, and how difficult it might be to make happen. And therefore you need to put a logical, rational, sensible plan together so that human beings can latch onto that plan and understand it and see where they fit in the plan. You do need to use sensible change methods in order to run that change out, and you need to align them with your project management method. So dovetailing the two together. Building and applying your skills in your project sponsors, in your change managers, and in your empowered staff. And empowering staff can often mean training them in what empowerment means in the first place. And then investing. This stuff, it's not going to be a cheap thing to do, but it is a highly valuable thing to do, because once you've got it right and you can start emulating that on the next change and project and the next one, things do get better. We've also found that if you have a dedicated change manager, change director, it doesn't matter what you call them, senior responsible owner, then your chances of your change actually surviving and working are increased. And they're reckoning on about 19%. So those are factors which might contribute to successful change. How do we improve those success rates, though? I think right at the top of the organization, we have to have very senior managers and executive leadership to absolutely understand the nature and impact of any change that they are proposing. It's all very well to say, we need to do this in a sweeping gesture. But what does this mean? What is that impact? How sweeping is it? Because if it's fairly big, we're going to have to do a lot of work to make sure it works properly and is effective. And the other thing is the 2 C words come out now, capability and capacity. Does the organization have those skills, knowledge, expertise, and therefore the capability to deliver this change? And does the organization have the capacity to be able to absorb the change, embed it, and drive out the benefits? There needs to be a vision allied to a business case that says, these are the benefits we expect to get out of making this change. So we need to know what the end point is, what's the end goal, and therefore what we expect to get out of it. We need to do proper stakeholder engagement. We need to identify who is going to be involved in this change. We need them to buy into this change and connect with the change in order for the change to work properly. Change, project management, all of their practices together need to be aligned and dovetailed together and matched to the structure of the organization. So if we are delivering across the functions, we need to make sure the right stakeholders in those functions are part of our project and change delivery. And good leadership. Support your team, support your business areas with good leadership, proper training. If you have workshops, make sure you have proper facilitators, independent, so that people can discuss what's going on with the change without having to think, I've also got to set the agenda and I've got to time and I've got to make sure people have a chance to talk, because actually I want a chance to talk as well. So have an independent facilitator allows people to have that discussion openly and sensibly. And of course, if you're going to do stuff, it's always wise to try and adopt some sort of best practice method across our change landscape. Make sure that we have proper progress reporting and information and data gathering and all of that, so that when we look at a dashboard, we can see if the change is working or not. Because if you haven't got the flow of information, how on earth are you going to be able to work out whether we should continue with what we're doing or not? Looking over your shoulder is, and in the rear view mirror, is not a bad thing to do. Look over your shoulder maybe at other case studies, other organizations who have done similar changes, and look for the lessons that they have created, and try and learn from that. But look in the rear view mirror at your own change success. Have you left a trail of devastation behind you from previous change activities? And if you have, your next change is going to be tricky because people are going to be wary of it. So you're going to have to mend that somehow and educate and train. One thing I will say before I leave this slide, COVID came along and forced some really quite interesting strategic changes on organizations, all because it's survival as opposed to growth. So the survival instinct kicked in and they said, whoa, let's stop the growth stuff for a minute. If we don't change some stuff immediately, we are not going to be here in 6 months' time to do any growth stuff. So a lot of this sort of stuff has become apparent over this last 12, 14 months. So we've had to do strategic realignment, and the pandemic forced us to rethink all our strategies. For instance, home or distance working became something that they had to get their heads around. Up until now, there's been a lot of, yeah, that's fine. Certain organizations quite happy with distance working, with home working. Other organizations, and I could name it, but I won't, one that I work with, when we asked about home working and distance working, the managing director used the phrase, and I quote, over my dead body. Not particularly helpful, but I believe that organization, because of the pandemic, has now adopted home working. And talking to one or two of my ex-colleagues there, it looks like it's here to stay. So we have gone down the route of rethinking our strategies. Maybe we've had to offer different or complementary services or products. What about the way we work? We no longer open a shop, but guess what? We're still selling our products because we've now got an online presence that maybe we sort of had in the past, but we've had to ramp it up. And of course, you've seen partnering and joint ventures going on. So there's been a lot of strategic realignment during the pandemic. But we had to do it quickly. There was that need for speed and agility. And therefore, we had to deliver change quickly. We had to deliver it in a time-bound way. We didn't have the money that we thought we would have, 24 months prior to this. And therefore, we were cash-strapped, which meant that these sort of agile approaches tended to take a more of a front seat compared with the old, more traditional methods. I'm not saying traditional methods haven't been used, they have, but agile seems to have come to the fore. And I'll give you 3 examples of this. One of them is local to me, the Loose Cannon Brewery in Abingdon on Thames. The Loose Cannon Brewery, the minute that stuff started to become a bit of a problem, and we noticed that bread and flour was short during our first lockdown, not to mention all the toilet rolls, of course, but that isn't their bag. What they did is very sensibly, they linked up with a local bakery, one of the smaller concerns, because the bakery was now suffering as well. And they combined their products on their Loose Cannon website and introduced home deliveries. They did that really quickly, probably within, I would say, about a week and a half of the first lockdown. And that was their first increment, because I know the owner of the brewery, and he said, we set out a path of the things that we must get done. And I said, "Ooh, you use the word must. That's interesting. Does that mean you were going down an agile route?" He said, "I have no idea whether it was agile or not, but there are things we must get done to survive, and there are things that we ought to get done." I said, "Okay, you used your word ought there. I could turn that to a should, couldn't I?" We were laughing over this outside his brewery. Along came increment 2. And they increased their product range through their website. So they were expanding and diversifying to a degree to include their wines and spirits and things. In increment 3, now they were doing home deliveries and they were doing them frequently. They thought, actually, we need a new van to do this. And they bought an electric delivery van. And they wanted to do that to demonstrate that it was all around town. We're going to reduce our emissions. And what we're going to do is we're going to use an electric van to show that we are trying desperately to be ecologically friendly. And they introduced the old return and rewash bottles. That was also for has produced a very, very good cost initiative. I remember them as a child finding a Corona bottle on the street and taking it to the shop and getting sixpence for it and thinking, "Hey, I'm a millionaire. It's brilliant." Why we ever stepped away from it, I have no idea. I think the throwaway society, disposable society, just took hold of us, unfortunately. And they still use them, by the way. Increment 4, as lockdown was lifting in July of last year, they added a click and collect service, so you could basically order through the website, pay for it, drop in there, pick it up, and carry it off home. But the home delivery service was still, and is still, a really good option for a lot of people. And finally, the increment 5, during that period, they then started to open up a tap room where you could go in, be served by a waiter stroke waitress, and it was properly governed by social distancing and all the measures that were in place. And guess what? Those people who were using click and collect at that point would think, I could probably get rid of a pint of beer here. And they go in and see if there was a table available, take a space, have a pint, and then take their beer home. So they changed how they worked almost almost dramatically within about 6 months. Example B. Long John's Fish and Chip Shop down in Wareham in Dorset never had an online presence as far as purchasing is concerned. They had an online website which was sort of flat HTML pages, but they uprated. Their first increment was, we've got to keep selling stuff and nobody's allowed to come here. You know, they can't come inside the place and buy stuff now. So we've got to do something else. So they then uprated their website, offering home delivery, offering credit card payments, which they hadn't done before. And then increment two, as lockdown eased into the summer holiday period, click and collect service. So very similar to the way that Loose Cannon worked. However, they made it mandatory for people to pick up at a specific time, so that there would only ever be around about 2 or 3 people standing around the outside of the shop, where the table was at the front door, collecting their food. And it was really interesting because just down the road it was another fast food facility, and there was a crowd of people outside the door, and you just sort of stop to think, there is no social distancing going on there, and that's horrific. But these guys had worked it out. Their last thing was they then introduced a tap and pay facility at the shop front, so that if people hadn't paid through a credit card through the web, they could still order and they could pay when they arrived. And they did that for those people who arrived at the shop without having done the click and collect through the web, and therefore they protected their staff. No need to handle cash and that sort of thing. So even places like fish and chip shops have had to adapt from what has been a traditional way of working. My final one is Raintree, which is a branch of Capstone. They do library books and things like that for schools. And my younger daughter is the financial controller of this lot in the UK. And what they did is they got one jump ahead of lockdown. So 2 weeks prior to the first lockdown on the 23rd of March or whatever it was, they moved all their staff to home working so they could iron out any IT or connectivity or human issues that might arise, which I thought was remarkably good leadership. Then they came to increment 2. There were people who didn't have adequate equipment, and therefore they provided all the additional equipment for home working. They introduced Microsoft Teams. They did big Zoom town hall meetings with the US and the UK all joining together so that the staff could keep in touch. They introduced the next increment, because they got Zoom now. They tended to do things like virtual office parties or quizzes. They even managed to get an online group Pilates session to go to keep people's morale up, which are still running now, by the way. And then because they've recognised people are working from home, they want to try and enthuse people. So they've allowed for slightly more learning and development opportunities Virtual training events and things like that are more accessible. So, even a traditional publishing company is doing things in a very, very different way. So, in summary, projects deliver outputs and various capabilities that, once we have them, in turn allow organizational change to occur. They need to be managed properly to provide quality, fit for purpose outputs. Otherwise, they're not going to be any good for the business and they won't drive out the benefits. And we should always remember that both traditional and agile project approaches are equally valid to introduce change. If you look on the other side about change, it needs to be managed in line with those project deliveries. Dovetail your project delivery and your change management together to ensure we get the right outputs delivered at the right time for the business to be able to make the change appropriately. Change needs to be led, therefore leadership qualities are required for change. More management qualities for delivering projects, more leadership style for delivering change. And if you lead it properly, change will stick. We like sticky change. We don't like Teflon change. Teflon change doesn't work. And finally, it's all about people. Projects are about people. Change is about people. So stakeholder engagement and communication are absolutely integral to making change work effectively. That's really all I've got to say about projects and delivering change. So what I'll do now is I will hand over to Jess, who has appeared on my top right of my screen to say hello. It's a shame I can't do the same. So Jess, any particular questions or queries?
Yeah, thank you so much for such an interesting session, Richard. It was really great, and I learned a lot myself as well. We've had some questions come in, but I would still encourage people to pop any more they might have in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them. I'm going to group the first two questions together, Richard, because they're both COVID-19 related, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So we have, due to COVID-19, employees are going through lots of changes in their personal lives. Should our approach to change management look to reflect this? And secondly, do you think that approaches to change management and ways of working which have emerged in response to COVID-19 are likely to stay and become more mainstream?
Two great questions. The first one I will answer by saying we should already be thinking about what's going on in people's personal and domestic lives when we are trying to engage with change anyway. People have various views and feelings, not just about the change that's happening in their organizational life, but also how they adopt that change is also impacted by what's going on in their personal lives. And I'm not suggesting we should be intrusive. That is not what I'm asking for. What I am suggesting is that we be a little more open and sensible about how we treat people, and recognize that people's personal lives do impact how they learn, how they pick things up. So I think that's something that we need to bear in mind. Good change managers recognize this, by the way. They are sensitive to people's moods and concerns. Do I think that what we've done over the last 12 months will stay with us as far as change is concerned and the way we implement change? I think it will. I think we've learned a lot. And I think so long as we continue to keep learning, I think we will adapt our change management methods in a better way. So I think it is with us now.
Great, thank you. Got another question here. What tools or guidance are available to support decision makers in flexing their features or indeed deprioritizing? It sounds like a great approach, but how do you convince risk-averse boards or senior execs?
Oh my. It's a tricky one, this. if you work in an organization which is very much a command and control structure, the whole empowerment thing to begin with is a wee bit scary for them. And therefore they are slightly suspicious of you saying something like, you might not get everything you want, because I can understand them saying, yeah, hold on, I'm paying for this, I should get everything. I think it's a case of, the way you've got to do it is pick a project to go with Agile. Pick one that is likely to be successful because you've got a relatively good set of products to be able to deliver within time. You've got some good people in that project team who understand empowerment and understand the Agile way of working. And you have a sponsor, a business sponsor, who is also signed up to that Agile way of working. And use that as a flagship for you to be able to then say, it does work. This one works. Others will work, but we have to bear in mind that there are these Agile requirements and techniques. And one of them is prioritization. And prioritization is a very tricky thing. Lots of different stakeholders will have must-have priorities. And you need good business analysts to be able to challenge those priorities and say, is that must-have really a must-have? Could we break the must-have down into lower level products or lower level requirements, some of which might actually end up being coulds and shoulds? So actually, this big must-have that you think, for instance, I'll give you an example. You must have a general ledger in order to be able to do your accounting and stay within HMRC's requirements. Yes, you must. Must you have a treasury section for it though? No, you don't have to have a treasury section. Oh, so this must is now being broken down into other things. So start to think about that. Can you break the big musts down into smaller must, shoulds and coulds? And that way you deliver what needs to be delivered for a working solution, as opposed to trying to deliver everything and potentially failing.
Thank you so much. Okay, I've got a final question here. If an organization is recruiting a new CEO, should it ensure that person is qualified and experienced in change management and project management, leadership and promoting good communication? And is appointing internally likely to be a recipe for disaster for a failing organization?
Would I want them to be absolutely qualified in it, or would I want them to be qualified by experience in it? I tend to look at the two things separately, by the way, because you could get somebody who is a novice who gets a qualification in change management, and on their CV they look good, but they've had no experience. On the other hand, you could get somebody who has had 30 odd years worth of change management, doesn't hold a qualification, but is absolutely excellent because of their track record and their experience. I think there's a mix in there. I think you need people who show leadership and therefore have an understanding of people as opposed to just process and tools and technique. And I think that's the key thing. It's nice if they have done some formal education about change management, if they've at least appreciated Kubler-Ross, Bridges, Edgar Schein, Daniel Pink, and the rest of them, who have lots of great ideas about how change should be done. Then I think those are the sorts of people, if you're recruiting a new CEO, they need to be a leader before a manager anyway. And then they need to understand people. Was there a second part to that question, Jess?
Yeah, it was just to say, is appointing internally a
Oh,
recipe for disaster for failing organizations?
not necessarily. Not necessarily. You may have somebody internal who is at a point where they could move their career to a CEO position, who actually has all the right attributes, but hasn't been able to demonstrate them under a previous CEO. So I think it's more about experience and attributes and characteristics as a leader. It's not always a recipe for disaster. If you haven't got somebody of that ilk, I would suggest then you look outside and try and find somebody who has got a bit of a track record of changing businesses, not with a big stick, but with encouragement and engagement.
That's great. Thank you so much, Richard. I think we'll call it to a close there. Thank you for your fantastic presentation, and thank you to everyone for joining us. As I mentioned in my introduction this morning, Richard's going to be delivering a project management course at Cardiff University at the end of June, and we're really pleased to be able to offer attendees for today's session a discount for the course. So we'd love to see some of the people who are on the call there at the training course. So thank you so much, Richard, and thanks to everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Jess.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.